Let's look at some HEMA heavy sparring gloves from Kvetun Armoury. Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. Now these are the XIPHOSURA gloves, linked below, from Kvetun Armoury. Now you obviously know that I have produced a sabre with Kvetun and I do work with them on various things. However, I've not really been involved with the development of these. So this is hopefully a pretty impartial review apart from some gloves I don't get anything out of it. I have had these gloves. I've actually had an earlier prototype of these gloves a few months ago, and then subsequently I had these made to my size with various updates. I did give a little bit of feedback actually. As it transpired, various other people were also testing these gloves and gave pretty much the same feedback to me as I did. And these are, in short, pretty fantastic heavy sparring gloves. Now, off the bat, I will mention the fact that numerous people that saw these online on Facebook and other places noted that they are mitten gauntlets, and the closest comparison to them, therefore, are pretty much the Spez heavy gloves. Now, I have owned, in fact, do still own Spez heavy gloves. However, I don't use them anymore for various reasons. They never really worked well with my sizing of hands. These Kvetun gloves are made to your size. Now, I should mention there are some pricing differences. The standard Spez heavy gloves are, I believe, 170 euros. These XIPHOSURA gloves, linked below on the Kvetun Armoury website, are 210 euros. And they have about an 8-week production time to be made in your sizing. Now, I would absolutely recommend getting gloves made to your specific size, because they will just work much better for you. Everyone's hands are slightly different sizes and proportions, and Kvetun actually have a whole bunch of interchangeable parts now that they can make these to suit different hands within certain parameters. I imagine if your hands are too small or too massive perhaps, then they might reach the end of the tolerances, but contact Kvetun about that if you've got any concerns or doubts. Now, these are primarily longsword gloves, okay? Now, many of you will know I used to do a lot of longsword sparring, and I used to compete in longsword many moons ago. I am not a big longsworder these days. That being said, I have been using these for longsword, and perhaps even a tougher test, I've been using these to some degree for poleaxe as well. So I'm preparing to run a session on poleaxe fighting at an event, and so I've been doing more poleaxe recently. And I will tell you, these stand up absolutely fine. These are, and this is I guess the headline of my review, these are the most protective gloves that I have literally ever owned. These are even more protective, certainly in a HEMA sense, against blunt weapons than my steel mitten gauntlets. And these are more protective, I believe, than the Spez heavies as well. They give more complete protection, whilst also giving better articulation, in my opinion. I should also mention as well, if people are making a comparison between these and the Spez heavies, these are mechanically rather different. These have a greater number of lames on the front. They have a completely different designed backplate, a completely different designed cuff, and a completely different thumb, utterly different thumb actually, and very different articulation, wrist articulation. And personally, I would also say that I think that these are better made. These seem to be of better quality. Now, that's not to diminish how robust the Spez heavies are, and I know a lot of people swear by the Spez heavies, and they're kind of a standard, I guess, along with the sparring glove for longsword sparring. However, I believe that if you like the Spez heavies, you will like these even more once you have tried them. If I just pull these both off so I can actually show you some of the details up close, you will notice that the cuff is made a bit like some HMB and Battle of the Nations type gauntlets are made with overlapping plates around here, so they can compress actually quite small, expand and compress, and those are on elasticated bands there. So they've got quite a lot of expansion and contraction, and it also means they kind of stay pretty close to your arm, but they can, when they want to and when they need to, they can flare out and expand. Okay, so you've got expandability here, but importantly, and unlike, I have to say, other large cuffs I've tried, they don't stick out when you don't want them to. The wrist plate, which sits underneath the main metacarpal plate on the back of the hand there and underneath here, so it's hidden underneath inside here, is completely a U section. So it goes from one side all the way around to the other side, which means you've got a massive amount of wrist joint protection, which is a fair away from distance away from the wrist itself. So there's quite a lot of compression possible in there. Now, inevitably, whenever you have any kind of cuff, there is going to be some degree, particularly if you're doing techniques where you, like a zverkout or something like this, where you cross over, where these two things collide. And I will say, it is true to say that is a downside of these compared to, for example, sparring glove. The sparring glove has a more compact and smaller wrist articulation, so you can get closer with the wrists. You can get the wrists closer to each other with a sparring glove compared to something like these, for example. But what I would say is I think these you can actually get a closer crossing, certainly than you can with the St. Mark's gloves, which I also own, and I have to say really have grown to hate. But the St. Mark's gloves, the wrists are much bigger, and I would say these are slightly smaller at the wrist than the Spez Heavies are, at least that's my impression. Depends a bit on your sizing, depends a bit on what size you get these and what size the Spez Heavies you have. But I would say these are slightly more compact wrists and smaller wrists than the Spez Heavies are. Because you've got a greater number of plates up here, I would say that the articulation is slightly better. The grip on the inside, comparable to the Spez Heavies, it's a suede-like material and reinforced near the tips of the fingers. Very, very good. And importantly, you have a fully enclosed end of thumb. So the protection on the thumbs is really, really superb. And although it's made in plastic, it's comparable with the sort of gauntlets you find on full contact steel fighting gauntlets. And I think that's pretty much where the design of these has come from. Another thing I really love about these is that this area here, where you can see the orange checkering, is padded. And having that area padded is really, really good, because as you know, when your fist is closed around the grip, that is one place that sometimes you can't put a plate over it very easily. But when you get hit there, it can really, really hurt. And in sabre, I've certainly been hit there and been hurt there before. So having that padding on there is absolutely fantastic. And I will also say these plates come around the edges of the thumb and around the edges of the hand really, really well. So you're unlikely, obviously nothing's impossible, but you're unlikely to get a point in there, or you're unlikely to be injured on the side of your hand because it's completely enclosed. And you'll notice this very clever plate, again, it's on sprung elastic that comes around the side, and you can actually lift the thing up. Enables you to get good rotation with the thumb, whilst not being in the way, but it covers right the way around the base of where the thumb joins onto the hand. So absolutely fantastic bit of design there. I'd also say briefly about putting them on and taking them off is really very easy now. One of my feedback, and I know that other people gave the same feedback with the prototypes, was although the wrists and the cuffs were smaller and tighter, which seems like a good thing, it meant that you could put one glove on really easily, and then it became incredibly difficult to get the other glove on. Now you can, with sweaty hands and with tired hands, you can pull them off and put them on pretty damn easily. But they also stay on. Then, because they've got elastication inside them, they're not likely to fall off easily without you specifically pulling them off. Some people have asked me if these are suitable for one-handed swords, and I would say it depends very much on the user and the one-handed sword. Could you use these with an arming sword? I would say yes, 100%. I think most people are going to find these fine for an arming sword. They won't really work for quite a lot of side swords. Certainly, obviously, you can't put the finger over the quill on because it's a mitten. But if you've got a knuckle bow, the knuckle bow is probably going to be too small for you to get this into. I personally could not use these with a sabre. The sabre hilt's too restrictive, although if it's a completely open hilted sabre like a Polish sabre, you might find that you can use these for that, quite possibly. Personally, I wouldn't necessarily choose to, because of the loss of dexterity. The wrist rotation's pretty good, but you can't really move your fingers around enough as I would want to in a sabre. So I would say the basic rule is, if it's an open hilt like an arming sword or perhaps a Polish sabre, yes, you could probably use these if that's your cup of tea. If it's any kind of enclosed hilt like a side sword with a knuckle bow or a sabre with a sabre hilt, enclosed sabre hilt, you cannot use these. They are too big. They're really primarily for longsword and arguably pole arms as well. So the upshot is really for longsword and polearms, as I say, these are probably the most protective gloves that I have ever got my hands on. To me, they're better than the Spez Heavies, and they're also better than the St. Mark's gloves, which aren't made anymore, but I own a pair. So these are really, really great. They offer more protection than the sparring glove. However, these are a bit heavier than the sparring glove. The sparring glove has got greater dexterity. So as always with any type of armour, it's a trade-off. Protectiveness versus weight and dexterity and flexibility. These are comparable in weight and flexibility to the Spez Heavies, but I would say offer more protection than the Spez Heavies. So if you really, really want to protect your hands to the highest possible degree, I would say that these are one of the best gloves you can currently get, and that is my honest opinion at the moment. So check out the link below to the XIPHOSURA gloves from Kvetun Armory, and thanks very much to Kvetun for letting me test these out. And these are my absolutely 100%, these are my go-to longsword or polearm gloves now, and all of the others have been put into storage. Thanks for watching. You can check out the channel for more reviews, and if you're not subscribed, please consider doing so. I'll see you back on the channel really soon for another video. Cheers folks.